My name's Quick Pick Nick, and having simulated millions of lineups, here's your locks and lotteries on both FanDuel and DraftKings for the Week 9 main slate of the NFL this Sunday, November 7th. Stick around until the end of the video to see full lineups on both platforms, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube for more main slate lineups, Monday and Thursday night slates, and NBA content coming soon. Before getting into the picks, any player I designated as lock is one who is found in many top-ranked simulated lineups and is expected to outperform their price point projection, whereas a lottery was found in relatively fewer lineups but is still likely to exceed their expected price value. Starting with our lock at quarterback, my model's favorite pick for this slate is TYROD Taylor. Coming back from a 6-week injury, Taylor returns to a Houston team that has struggled without him in the captain's seat, winless since Taylor's only full game in the season opener versus Jacksonville. In fact, Taylor threw for 2 touchdowns and nearly 300 passing yards in that Week 1 matchup against Jacksonville, and against a Miami defense that ranks worse than the Jaguars in all defensive categories with respect to allowed passing yards. Taylor should be able to pick up right where he left off. His cost is also very appealing at over $3,000 cheaper than the top-priced quarterbacks on either platform. If you don't believe in the miracle of modern medicine and would rather look elsewhere than this injury-prone league traveler, then a pick who may seem inconsistent on the surface is Kirk Cousins, scoring over 22 fantasy points in 4 games this season, with the other 3 falling below 15 in each. These inconsistencies, though, can be explained by his tough matchups, with one low mark coming against the Browns' top 3 secondary and the other 2 facing divisional rivals. This week against the Ravens, who have allowed the most receiving yards to opponents in the NFL, I would expect nothing less than one of those 22-plus marks for Cousins. At running back, there was a lot of variability from lineup to lineup in my simulation, so it's hard to pick a clear lock, but there were several lotteries in my model who appear to be viable options for this slate. If I had to pick just one, though, the closest to a lock is Aaron Jones, playing alongside Jordan Love in his first start for political reasons I won't get into, although calling them political might be too deep already. But anyways, Jones just scored above 20 fantasy points last week against Arizona's top 5 rush defense. And with a rookie quarterback facing a forgiving Chiefs defense, Jones will likely find himself in the spotlight a lot in this game. Another lottery on the other end of the price spectrum is James Conner, costing surprisingly little considering his average of a touchdown per game, ranking 3rd in the category at running back, facing a San Francisco defense that has allowed the 5th most rushing touchdowns to opponents. Back at the top of the price list is Austin Ekeler, going against Philadelphia's bottom 5 defense and allowed fantasy points to running backs, and Cordero Patterson, drawing a tough matchup in New Orleans but filling in for Calvin Ridley in more of a receiving role, with the Saints' pass defense performing much worse than their rush defense. One final pair of lotteries you might want to take a look at are from Philadelphia, Boston Scott and Jordan Howard. The Chargers have a notoriously weak rush defense, ranking last in the NFL in allowed rush yards, and either running back from the Eagles are cheap enough that they deserve at least a second thought against this porous LA defense. At receiver, the primary lock for my simulations is Adam Thielen, costing less than Justin Jefferson on both platforms, yet posting better numbers over the past couple of weeks. Again, Baltimore's secondary seems to be the significantly weaker half of their defense, and with Thielen's recent overtaking of Jefferson on the stat line with a lower price, Thielen is in a position for a career day. Jefferson isn't a bad pick either, though, and we'll start off the lottery section for the receivers. Analytically, both receivers have the exact same number of receptions across the season, with Jefferson earning more receiving yards and Thielen finding the end zone more often. Other lottery receivers include Jamar Chase, still being slept on by DraftKings, especially considering his top 5 ranking in both receiving yards and touchdowns. Jalen Waddle finding the 8th most receptions among receivers in the NFL with a favorable matchup against Houston, and Hunter Renfrow finding an expanded role for another unrelated to football reason, but nevertheless facing a Giants defense that has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to receivers. Another pick found in many of my simulated lineups is Brandon Cooks, reuniting with Taylor on the field this week after a big Week 1 with a quarterback in which Cooks earned over 130 receiving yards. One other team you might look towards for a receiver is the Bills, including the options of Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, and Cole Beasley, facing a bottom 5 pass defense of Jacksonville. But I'll keep my opinion of which one will get the points after last week's travesty with Sanders' goose egg, but let's just not talk about that. Now, moving on to tight ends, there wasn't a definitive lock here, but instead several very worthwhile lotteries I could see in any lineup. Those tight ends consist of Mark Andrews with a favorable matchup against Minnesota's poor defense, and especially on DraftKings with his lower cost. Kyle Pitts effectively acting as a number 1 exclusive receiving threat in Atlanta alongside Patterson. Mike Gesicki catching the 3rd most passes as a tight end this season facing the Texans this week. CJ Uzomah, a very cheap option with the most receiving touchdowns at tight end, and George Kittle returning from IR at a much discounted price. At flex, I've just given you plenty of viable options, and at defense, my model tries to pick the cheapest choice without picking a blowout. This week, those defenses include the Chiefs, Broncos, and 49ers on FanDuel, and the Chiefs, Texans, and Browns on DraftKings. With all that being said, here are 2 of my favorite simulated lineups on both FanDuel and DraftKings. As you can see in the FanDuel lineup, I'm stepping back into the batter's box with Sanders, which is really my only concern on that end. The rest of the lineup passes the visual inspection with full marks otherwise. And on DraftKings, there's really nothing too concerning there. We've got the 2 tight end with CJ Uzomah, but the man's been a touchdown machine this season, and there's no reason to expect him to slow down in a heated division rivalry. In any case, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.